Program manager here at CPW. Welcome if you haven't been here before. Some of you got some familiar faces. I have a couple announcements before we get started. If you're not already familiar with CPW, we have exhibition space. We have artist talks every week, and on Thursdays, meet the artists. We have a digital media lab that's already open over at our new home, which eventually we'll move all the operations over there starting about September. So keep your eye on that. But in the meantime, we are about to announce our summer workshops. So a lot of those will be happening over there. So please keep an eye out. Our digital media lab, we also have like a very accessible day, community day. So if money is a barrier, or if you just want to kind of get your toes in and see what it's about and how you can utilize it, I suggest Mondays are great for that. Right now we have an exhibition of Adriana Alt's work, Levy. It's really stunning work. I believe we have a couple books left for sale if you're interested, published by Void. I'm going to get started. Kate Steciw holds a BA from Smith College and an MFA from the School of Art Institute of Chicago. Steciw has exhibited extensively in New York and abroad in group exhibitions at the International Center of Photography, Hauser and Wirth, Johannes Vogt Gallery, and I-Beam. She has had a solo exhibition at Higher Pictures Gallery, Christopher Gaillard Gallery, Brand New Gallery, Naumaster Bar Am in Berlin, Anuruma Gallery in Naples, and Levi Delville in Brussels. Her work has been featured in Art Forum, Art in America, and Interview Magazine. Steciw lives and works in upstate New York. We'll also be joined by artist Letha Wilson, who was born in Hawaii, raised in Greeley, Colorado, and currently works in Prairieville and Brooklyn, New York. She received her BFA from the Syracuse University and her MFA from Hunter College in New York City. Letha attended Skowhegan School of Painting and Sculpture in 2009, and her artwork has been shown at many venues, including Mass MoCA, Dekorova Sculpture Park and Museum, the Aldrich Contemporary Art Museum, Columbus Museum of Art, and the International Center for Photography. Both artists will present their artwork and share their unique perspectives on photography. Kate and Letha met over 15 years ago through a group exhibition and became fast friends ever since. Letha describes Kate as the yin to her yang as they continue to develop work expanding the medium of photography to the very edges. Kate's background working with Photoshop and digital photography has led to her current practice using real-life collage elements in vibrant, surreal, and color-filled wall works. Letha's practice has analog roots in landscape photography with a sculptural approach, working with materials such as concrete, steel, and drywall. Both artists are located in upstate New York on either side of the Hudson, and most importantly, are Geminis who drive Subarus and love their dogs. Can we give a warm welcome? I believe we're going to start with Kate. Thank you. And we'll save questions till after their talks.
Yeah, we should have. Yeah, I guess you sit. We're going to try to tag team this a little bit. Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for coming out. It's such an honor to be here because Letha and I were both saying that we've had pieces and shows at CPW, and there's a lot of people here who kind of gave us our first opportunities to show anything. I see you, Helen, Willie, and I'm so grateful. So yeah, you're probably wondering who this man is. This is my grandfather, and I had to show this because I was realizing the other day that it's like, you know, there was no artists in my family, but there was a relationship to photography that was strange. He used to make these collages using advertisements and as a photocopy of his driver's license picture. So that's his little head up there, and he would type out these, these little altered advertisements and then photocopy them and disperse them. He's also a tremendous Polaroid sniper. So it was like quantity over quality, and really the act of photographing was really like prized in my family in an interesting way. So I've just been thinking about how all of that affected me, and how it led me to photography. I always loved when people like brought out cameras in my family, and cameras were super exciting, photography was super exciting. And so it's like having the opportunity to come and talk at CPW is really like an opportunity to re-engage with my deep love for this medium. And you know, the yearning I've always felt to be a better photographer, which has kind of led me to the practice that I have now. This is a book, a photograph of a book that I put out in 2010 with Hasla, which is actually like the first and the last time any of my straight photographs were ever in print or exhibited or shown in any format. This book is called The Strangeness of This Idea. At this time, I was working at, after graduate school, I got a job numerous jobs working as a retoucher, a fashion retoucher. And at this point, I was working with Art and Commerce, a famous agency representing photographers, and they had a digital post-production department that I was running. And I was secretly using their equipment to scan my own images and working on their computers in Photoshop to alter them. And it just so happens the guy who was in charge of the scanning was David Scherner, who now runs Hasla Publishing. And he was like looking over my shoulder. He was like, "What are you doing?" And I was like, "Oh, this is my own stuff. Don't look," you know. And then he kept looking, and we started a conversation over many beers that's kind of led to the publication of this book. But this book really kind of, for me, was like the beginning of a departure, because I was in so much debt after grad school, which I'm sure a lot of you can relate to. I instantly started working as soon as I moved back to New York City, which was in 2003, which was also a really interesting time because the kind of work that was being shown in photography galleries was like nothing like anything that I ever made, or and really far out of my reach. High production value, like lots of you know, expensive printing processes and all of that. And I remember going to like Philip Lorca de Corsia shows and just being like utterly deflated. And this was also around the same time that Ryan McGinley came onto the scene, and it was like super exciting for me to see. I was like, oh wow, like I don't need a fancy camera. I don't need like, you know, any kind of fancy thing. I don't even need to have all this like Chicago conceptual, like he's just out there taking pictures of his hot friends and it looks good and people are looking at it. And it was really like galvanizing for me, but it didn't solve the problem that I was still a really bad photographer. I mean, I'm talking about like loading the film backwards, you know, like just never quite understanding exposure. I shouldn't say this to anyone just in case like any students are in the room. They're like, why am I listening to you? Yeah, I mean, horrific. So I also then I couldn't afford it because these jobs that I was working at, like, you know, day in, day out, didn't pay much. And I was just like incredibly frustrated. And I say this because like for me, the evolution of my practice kind of is a series of frustrations and then working through them to get to a different kind of understanding of my relationship to photography. So I put out this book, and really the image on the left hand of this spread is like the last straight image, the first and last straight image, and probably one of the only good one I ever took. But what I was trying to do with this book was make a relation. I was spending day in, day out as a fashion retoucher, and I was working on other people's images, and I was realizing that many of the images, and this was for not only fashion and advertising, but for fine art photographers as well, and realizing that there was this all of this like unseen labor going on with pretty much all of the images that we consumed. There wasn't really any such thing as a straight image anymore. There was, everything was a composite or a collage of some kind. So I was starting to think about like how we relate to images in general. And for me, this was like, I was in grad school when 9/11 happened. And like the week before 9/11 happened, I was going to a slide library. I probably consumed maybe like, you know, and this is an aggressive like photography nerd, maybe a couple hundred images a week. And like after 9/11, we were online all the time, and it was like thousands a day, not even conscientiously. And that shift really changed something for me too, in terms of my relationship to a straight image. I just couldn't understand how it worked or how we needed it to work after that shift from, offline to online. And in the book, which came out also the same year that my father passed away, I was also trying to sort of deal with, photography's always been kind of like deathly to me in a strange way. Like it's like the likelihood that the subject of the photograph that you're looking at is gone is high. So there's always been this like sort of mournful relationship that I've had to photography. And I also, anyone who's gone through any mourning process knows that there's time shifts. So, there's like time goes on outside of your mourning and time slows down inside of your mourning, and things are not moving linearly. So I was also starting to combine images in one plane in an effort to kind of like visually cope with that strangeness of perception that happens when you're mourning. And the book, the title of the book, The Strangeness of This Idea, comes from a chapter in one of my father's books about metaphysics, that basically it's like the one of the strangest ideas that we have to cope with is the passage of time and the event and inevitability of our own death. So, which to me was always like, photography to me has always had this like, it's like a yearning we have to stop time, and it's always been related like, psychically to me and to this effort that, this very human kind of effort to stop time and to hold a moment in space. So there's a lot of non sequiturs here, so just bear with me. I looking back on my practice, I realized that I like kind of spastically go from one thing to the next, and I'm trying to be more disciplined in my older age. But so I was also really fascinated with what we do with the images we take, because I saw this transition from taking 12, 16 images of medium format, in a medium format camera, 35, 36 images on a 35 millimeter camera. And I was like, but now we take thousands, now there's just thousands, and they live in this like, liminal space of perpetual saving and storage. So what do we do with them? And I was really interested in the fact that we no longer made photo albums per se, and we were instead making things like custom wall art or like photos on canvas. And that was very like touching to me, because it was like a way to capture something that was an increasingly ineffable in our experience of photography. So this is a photo rug I made early on. I think it was shown in like someone's basement in Baltimore. And I was also sort of questioning like what photographs we use for what, like what do we save? What do we put on these, objects, these photo objects, these like print on demand photo objects, and why, and what happens when we disrupt that, that expected use. So, a lot of my practice has been governed by like a couple of questions, which is like, why, if that, then why not this? And what next? So, which is kind of hard to follow, but at the same time, like, and it's just me, clumsily answering those questions for myself and then being frustrated with the answers. So this is the inside of my dog's mouth on a like keepsake box. And I've always been interested in, things that I call like photo adjacent too, like the unseen kind of leftover objects and operations of photography. So these are some photo backdrops that I stretched into strange shapes, hand-painted photo backdrops. And there's just this like, thread that started to develop too, with like recognizing the often unseen physical, often creative labor that goes into photography, like as a larger concept. And these backdrops, a lot of them are hand painted. There's an actual human gesture that is meant to be viewed out of focus that when you stretch them and bring them into focus is quite strange and beautiful. So I'm working at this point. This was my first solo show in New York in 2011 at Primary Photographic that I was working solely with iPhone images and my archive of just randomly saved JPEGs, really into JPEGs, really into the fact that they like self-destruct over time and the lossiness of them, and it feels like much more kinship to an actual like printed image in that way, and it's like in their sort of like, I guess their fallibility. So what I didn't know what I was, what are you going to do? Print JPEGs? So I was, I wasn't so interested in the content of these things, but I had been saving them because they had some sort of aesthetic psychic pull. And I was like, well, why don't I just try to move them into a shape that just is about like the pure formal qualities, the colors, the textures. So you're not really engaging with the, the subject of any one image, and more engaging with the, artifacts and smears and like pixels and basic color composition. So this was my first stab at kind of trying to pull apart what makes up a photograph today. And I was always kind of stumbling around with these collages too. And now I call them collages. I used to call them composites. I was really interested in the layer-based working system that Photoshop introduced, and the fact that all of those layers were supposed to then disappear once the piece was finished and be like imperceptible in the final work. So I started layering and collaging essentially pieces together in Photoshop shortly after those JPEGs, and I was kind of dubious of the results. I was like, well, what is this? Is this, I wasn't sure what I wanted from them, and I was nervous about how I was going to bring these into an actual like physical art object, because at the time I was like posting them a lot on Tumblr, and people are like, yeah, Tumblr, awesome, like we like what that is. And this is also around the time that I discovered Letha Wilson, because a few of us, now they call us post-internet artists or image makers or whatever, we were just sharing stuff on Tumblr, like Rachel DeYotta, myself, Sam Falls at the time, Lucas Blaylock. We were just posting weird stuff on Tumblr. There really was no conceptual or commercial or institutional support for anything that we were doing, not even close to it. So the idea of bringing something from that world into objecthood was actually really, it took a lot of years for me to figure out what I wanted from that. But these two pieces were shown at M&B Gallery, and it's also interested in the white squiggles are decals of a sexy lady that I had cut up. It's interested in the way that these sort of like again, these images, not photographic images, could also be cut up and made into gestures. There was a lot of cutting and a lot of layering, so at first I was trying to keep these firmly in the realm of the photographic reference, which was, so these are, C prints, digital C prints framed with museum glass and all that stuff. And it wasn't until much later that I started to question even why do we frame things the way that we do? So I started to put the collages behind different colors and adhere things and alter the frames in ways that really my aim was just to call into question, like why do we do these things? Why is this an untouchable surface? And in that way, like I've always kind of seen my practice like as much conceptual training as I had, it's like really not that different than my grandfather's. Just like, how can I insert myself into this trajectory? How can I, make a mark here when these things are acting so, aggressively on me, these kinds of images, these, art finishing aesthetics, whatever, automotive decals, like they're working on me. How can I work on them? How can I do something with them or to them? So these were a couple of pieces where I was really intervening with like the concept of the frame. And I found that frustrating because I was missing the photography. And I was like, I was also wondering what, in this like onslaught of digital images, how could kind of returning to the initial long sticks that I had done, how could I bring this into a third dimension? And this was a show that Letha and I were in at Martos together. She'll show you her pictures from the same show. But what was the name of this show again? Touchstone, yeah. With Rachel Deotta as well. And it was kind of the three of us dealing with dimensionality and photography, and how that, and for each of us, we handle that in really different ways. I remember the first time I saw Lisa's work, she was really the only one of us that was making objects. And I was like, I thought they were 3D fakes or something at first, because everybody was just online. And I was like, oh my gosh, how these are real things. So I was trying to make some real things because I had to compete with Letha, who was making real things out there. She was like the first one making real things like this. But I saw like the idea that many images existing in the same space or the same plane has always kind of driven the practice, whether they're, these hanging pieces or physical collages or digital collages. And it's really just a way to work out like a materiality that to me is effective at creating a, the same kind of experience that we have when we're dealing with what I like to call networked images. So these are the front and back of the same piece, and the same here. I used a lot of preset shapes in Photoshop to create these shapes, which has also been something that I return to from time to time, is like just the defaults of whatever program, and trying to find an aesthetic or like expressionistic possibility in the defaults of really anything. You could say Photoshop, but you could also say a photograph itself, or like finding the outer limits of what can be done is something that has always been a part of my exploration with photography. And it really coincided with this like proliferation of, pay on demand printing services where you could print on like any surface. And I was really interested in exploring that. Like, there was this, when I was in grad school, there was this perception that like the pristine surface of a photograph was like something that it was a prized quality, and color consistency and all of that was something that we were always striving for. And, with the experience of shifting to an online lifestyle, I was like, wow, this is just like, how does this make sense anymore? And what if that's part of the materiality of a digital image, is that it shifts color, it shifts perception as it moves from surface to surface. So I was doing a couple of shows in Berlin and Milan where I was using the same images on different surfaces and in different pieces, like pieces would move from one piece to another in the same show. Because I was interested in not only like the malleability of the image and the way that it could be moved from surface to surface, but the way that it could move from piece to piece, or even like venue to venue. So these, 5 minutes. Okay, I'll tear through it now. Yeah, thank you. So these were a couple of fabric pieces I did, and now you can see in the show there were some fabric pieces, some aluminum collages, and then the hanging pieces all together, and each one had pieces from the other that were easily recognizable as you walk through the space. And here's some of the the aluminum collages, which had leftovers from the hanging pieces stuck to the surface of the aluminum prints. And these are a show that Letha and I did, and we both had solo shows at Christophe Gaillard in the same opening, and we were basically I was just continuing with this idea of like what's left over, how can pieces move from one surface to another, with even more interrelation between the works. And I made a gigantic fabric piece I think there's 200 images in this. But again, this idea that the piece itself can be something that's mutable and malleable was something that was interesting me in the fabric work as well. So I got tired of that. It was exhausting and expensive. There's moments in the practice where I feel like I run into financial or spatial constraints, and I had just moved up here, and I was like, wait a second. What about those digital collages that I was doing like 10 years ago? There's something there. I don't have to stick stuff to them or make objects. I can just make these digital collages. And these were kind of represented the first time I thought of them as collage. And I just started churning them out, like, multiples a day. I framed and printed a few, but these are now no glass, printed on aluminum. Digital collage that I showed up in Roxbury a couple of years back. I really enjoyed sort of simplifying, getting back to the most basic gesture that I feel like it's kind of now after 15 years has become evident is like the defining gesture, which is a collage gesture. And I was intrigued when I made these of, intrigued by the way that I could work with like one or two gestures, one or two images, maybe three, and just pare it down to its most basic cut and paste gesture, which inevitably kind of led me to, can I do that physically? So the most recent work has been are their actual collages, prints on canvas that are glued together. they're glued together, as are my hands and my shoes and all of that stuff. And there's something like really absurd about the kind of gesture that I have developed by working digitally for many, many years, finding its way into the physical world, and then actually putting them together at this scale. This is one of the medium-sized pieces at 40 by 50. So there's like, I'm really like smushing these things together. And in that process, the canvas prints, which kind of come with this like glossy treatment on top, become really matte and canvasy looking. And it's starting to do something that I find really interesting, which is A, reveal itself that it is at its heart collage, and be engaged with the language of painting at the same time as these like print on demand photo art objects that one would get at Walmart. And that tension between those two worlds is really interesting to me. So this is kind of where we end up now. I'm trying not to move to something else very quickly. I'm trying to just stick with this for the moment. But it's interesting because when I was starting to make these, my partner was like, you should just stick to 2 images. And I was like, I should just stick to 2 images. So each one of these is only 2 images in one cut. Well, not this one. This one's 3. You have to break your own rules. Yeah. So sticking to 2 images in one cut and really focusing on the formal qualities of the images, for me, not only lets me, kind of liberate the thing from a language of like digital or Photoshop based art, but also to kind of situate the thing in a space that's like much more hard to define. Yeah, so these are the most recent works. They kind of range in size from 24 by 30 to 48 by 60. And, while the gesture kind of originates in Photoshop, they're hand cut out. So I'm really enjoying that there are these kind of like rough edges in a lot of the pieces where it really reveals that there's two physical layers.
And you learn how to make your own frames.
And I've learned how to make my own frames. Yeah. So work in progress, but how is that it for time? We're trying to keep it on time because we want to have more of a conversation. Yeah, we're going to do questions for both since we're going to share a lot of related stuff.
Thank you, Kate. I love seeing your grandfather's collage. That is something I had never seen
Do you
before.
want me to?
Sure. Yeah, give me a 5-minute warning. Okay, here we go. Now, what do I do? Do I just stick it, click it? How do I get it into view mode? Like, I can't even see it's so small. Is this how old I am? Yes. Let me get my bifocals going. I just can't see where the button is.
Top left.
Oh, way up here.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
There we go. Full screen.
Oh, yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
Oh, there we go.
All right. So, also starting with a little family moments. Hi. So I, even though I was born in Hawaii, we moved to Colorado when I was 4 years old. So, kind of like I say, like my beginnings of photography. So my dad was an avid outdoors person, and we had a little cabin in the mountains. And starting from when I was we would spend a lot of time in the mountains. And starting when I was about 6th grade, we would do these 1 week long backpack trips, me and my brother and my parents. So some very extremely remote locations. And apparently there was a few cameras being passed around, family members. This is one. So there's not very many people in these photos usually, but I recently asked my mom to give me some. So my dad must have taken this photograph. I'm there with a camera, and that is my mom. So every year we take a backpack trip, and then my dad would like choose the best one and get it blown up and on the wall. So those are sort of like our family photos. This is one that got blown up and put on the wall. That my dad must have taken this photograph too. So when I went to Syracuse, I decided when I was like in 6th grade that I wanted to go to college and major in art. I just decided. I stopped taking art classes after that because I figured when I get to college and I'm an art major, which was actually correct, I wouldn't be taking any more other classes. So I just was very determined. I don't really know why. And I think I thought my dad was also really not into this idea, but I convinced him. So I went to Syracuse and moved to the East Coast. And it was like so different, the East Coast, from growing up in Colorado. And I was actually a painting major at Syracuse. But I was really interested in like taking sculpture and printmaking and photography, and took black and white and color darkroom classes. And I started working with these images from home, from Colorado. I moved to New York City right out of undergrad. So I guess I'm going to date myself. In 1998, I moved to New York City. And then I went to grad school at Hunter. And I was still, so in Hunter, so the other thing was I started working for an artist named Jason Middlebrook, and he brought me on his installation crew. He built walls for galleries. So I learned how to build walls, drywall, and really enjoyed that. So I think as a viewer, I was really drawn to sculpture, but I was still sort of holding on to these photographs. So this was a piece in grad school, and I was thinking, can an image be representational and abstract at the same time? So it was like whiting out, this is actually a very small piece, whiting out all the elements or some of the elements. And then these are my first photo sculptures that I made in grad school. This is 20 years ago. Jen Kelly, my friend here from grad school, she can attest to this. I just had this idea of like, what if these things came together? I felt like, why is photography separate then? Why is it was separately listed in the newspaper listings for galleries. And I was like, I don't get that. Like, can landscape photography be contemporary? Can it be different? You know, even when I was making this piece, like putting a screw through the middle of that was like exhilarating to me. So I had this idea of sort of taking the form. This is actually my parents, my mom and dad, their outline of the figures, and then extruding it out into space as if the form was coming out of the wall. So I built this painstakingly with multiple layers of styrofoam. Jen, do you remember when I built this one? So I just sort of built it by hand, and the photo, this is from my thesis show. It's like 4 foot by 7 foot. It's a digital print, actually. And then this is extrusion of, this is a hotel. This is a Frontier Hotel sign in Las Vegas. So I kind of went big. This happens sometimes. My first ones. I also had a video in that show, which I didn't bring a still of. I did kind of try to hone this down. So I felt like there was something interesting there, but after grad school, this was the last extrusion piece I built. I didn't cover it with anything, so you can see it's multiple pieces of styrofoam. It's moving from my father into a Joshua tree, and it's installed in the corner of a gallery. So I felt like there was something interesting there, but I started working full-time at Artist Space, and I just really needed time. I was working too much, so I kept getting rejected from artist residencies. So I gave my parents let me do a residency at their house. I was like 30, by the way, at this point. So I go back to Colorado. If you go to my Instagram page, my mom wrote me this acceptance letter on marbled paper. It's very cute with like heart over the thought. Congratulations, you've been accepted. So I made my own residency. And it was like kind of going to Colorado. I was like reading Walden and just taking time and doing kind of stupid drawings, but it really was the time I needed to kind of clear my head and start having these ideas. I wanted my practice to be more quick and like my painter friends and just have always something to work on in the studio. And I decided to go back to the darkroom because I could print my own photographs and that would be quicker. And I was already shooting film, so it just made sense. This is something I wrote. So after I came back from that trip, I feel like things really started flowing for me in my studio. So ways to say fuck you to a photograph while still adoring it secretly. Arrows, bullets, bombs. So these are all the things. I've done quite a few of these things, actually, to my photographs over the year. But I was sort of trying to pinpoint this frustration at the, so like the landscape image has this beauty with it, and the frustration at the beauty, the skepticism of the beauty, but the longing and the flat little photograph that doesn't have anything to do with that real experience. And so what does that mean? Or what is that feeling when you look at an image and want to go there? So I was sort of battling with this, the love-hate of the photograph. So then I started printing my photographs in the analog color darkroom, thinking about action. So if you were to take an arrow and shoot it through the middle of this piece of paper, how would it fold towards you and back and away? And then making this form out of wood, and then there's a single photograph mounted onto it. And sort of, then the other thing was those earlier pieces were styrofoam, which I really didn't like working with. It was kind of toxic. So thinking about materials that had this relationship to the natural world, or had this sort of, you know, as a 2x4 being a tree, being a piece of wood, or drywall being paper and rock crushed gypsum. So those sort of relationships. Also that there was more of a sort of poetic link between the image and the form, that it wasn't quite so literal. So these are some pieces that sort of came out of that time. And now it's not going to be chronological, but kind of like the ways I'm approaching / attacking a photograph, thinking about the surface. So when I finally started getting into residencies, I got into Skowhegan in 2009 after I applied for 10 years. Keep trying. But it was a really good, for me, it was great. It was like several years out of grad school. And that was the first time I had my studio right in nature. And to walk through the forest every day and slow down, I realized that I could take a photo of like a pile of rocks and that could be a piece. It didn't just have to be a vista. So I stopped having expectations of what I was shooting. I would just go out there, and my job is to pay attention and gather images. So it kind of freed the process of shooting. Like I can shoot whatever I want. So that was something important I learned there. thinking about the surface, dipping it in cement. This is dipped in white cement and all the cement cracked off. Put face down in cement. It starts peeling the emulsion off the photograph. What about the frame? What if it's coming out of the frame? This is called granite tumbler. Vertical horizon, a horizontal image squished into a vertical frame. This piece is about like that big, by the way. But that's another thing I liked about working with photography is thinking about the scale. It could be this, it could be this. So what are the possibilities there and how does it change? How is the photograph held to the wall? So one of my ex boyfriends gave me a medium format camera, which I still use, so y'all should come out. And this is like one of the first photos I took with it, which is a really beautiful area. My parents moved to Craig, Colorado, so just this beautiful snowy pass, the Rabbit Ears Pass. And I really love this photo, but I didn't know what to do with it. And I was kind of carrying it around for months. And then I just had this idea of like punching it in the face. So that's sort of like this piece is, there's a single piece of wood and that single cut, and that piece of wood is really sandwiching it and just holding it up. So kind of letting the photograph behave as it will. It's kind of next step in that idea. There's a hole cut in the wall. This 2x4 is pushed into the wall, holding up this photograph. The piece is called 2x4. And then a larger version of that. This is a 12-foot 2x4 I installed in a museum in Austria. And again, I love this because the only thing holding up that photograph to the wall is the pressure of that 2x4 pinning it, and the corner is tucked into the wall. Again, so this is called slotted sunset. I've done a few versions of this. There's 2 slots in the drywall, and the photograph is kind of shoved into it, so it kind of bows out at you. Yeah, this piece. So this was a show. This piece is called, a version of a prop piece, definitely an homage to the Charles Ray piece, which is a photograph of the body, which is also referencing to a Stella piece, a prop. But this was a gallery in Washington that had this like curved wall. And they're like, here's $500 budget, do a solo show here. And I'm like, okay, thank you. But what is an artist gonna do with round walls, So I was sort of like, F you architect, and got this large piece of wood and really pinned this photograph up. So it almost becomes like a performance piece in itself. It's like an 8-foot by 10-foot photograph. So you have to walk over and under it. Also, this piece of wood was repurposed. It's now in my studio upstate holding up my lights. So, so a piece like this and several of the pieces only exist during the show. Again, what holds up a photograph? So a concrete column. This is a single photograph I took in the Grand Tetons, printed in one long piece. And that was also like at a certain moment, I was like, do I have to take my own photograph? And I started like Googling things and looking online. I was like, no, I got to go to the Grand Tetons. So a year or two later, my mom and dad and I go there. But it was a decision that it was important to me that I took these photographs and I went to these places because the process of hiking and being out there informs the work. It's not just the image, it's observing nature and kind of being there is important, Again, how's the photograph being held to the wall? This is a steel I-beam in a very large photograph. What about the back of a photograph? This is kind of an early piece. I would call it drawing. There's a piece of paper mounted to the back, painted red, these little triangles. It's almost like an advent calendar. So you see the wall behind the back of the photograph and the front at the same time. Seeing those are bronze pieces. So I did this whole series. So those holes go through to the wall behind it. These pieces of metal kind of coming out. This was a piece at Art in General. That was a really great show because I had several weeks to make this work on site. There's a hidden window behind this wall. So it actually had a shutter closed. The window had never been opened, like 30 years. So I took the drywall off, opened the shutter, put the drywall back on, then cut holes out of the drywall that corresponded with holes in this piece that's a photo mounted to aluminum. And then at certain times of day, the light would, it kind of looks like the Big Dipper. That was a happy accident. I didn't plan that, but I did let how, even if the sun wasn't coming through, if you walked up to it, you could feel the breeze on your face. And that's sort of like, you know, oh, I wasn't expecting that. Because I do think there's something about walls in a gallery or white walls that you don't really think what's behind it, or you don't expect to be confronted. This is one little shot of an artist book I did, but again, when you have a page of a book, you can see the front and the back side. So in these books, I cut holes in through them. What about the surface of an image? Even just a simple gesture like folding it and unfolding it, how does that change the image? This is called Hug. It's kind of an early cement piece. I had no idea what I was doing, but I slathered cement onto this. This is also from the Grand Tetons. And these are all photographs I printed in the darkroom, just to mention that. Folding, even the simple accordion fold, how much it changes the image. Thinking of, again, breaking up the rectangle, having it be circular. Sinking the horizon line in this piece. And a lot of times I'll just do a small version and kind of test it and then scale it up. So like this version it's solid concrete, so it weighs about 300 pounds. And then it is that risk of pouring concrete onto a photograph that you made. Face down. So, oh, my dad hated this piece so much. Never tell you that. Like, we had this piece is in that show we were in, and he went and saw the show. He only went to New York City once his whole life. Goes to see the show, and he's like, you know what, your pieces were the first, the second, and the 10th best pieces in the show. I'm like, what's the 10th? Oh, that one on the floor. Oh, what is it, for the earthworms? Like, he did not like it. But my point was, like, what if you only see the edge and it's face down, and is that frustrating? So, oh well, sorry, Dad. I got it, he didn't, it's fine. Sometimes dads don't get it. Fast forward, so now, like, I'm using UV print directly onto metal. So that kind of opens up different ways of working this. So this is a similar shape, but printed onto zinc. Printed onto vinyl. So again, like really having that image like hug the wall. I've also had the privilege and honor of going on a lot of other artist residencies to some amazing places. So this was at the Headland Center for the Arts, right across the bridge from San Francisco. Beautiful space. How strong is a photograph? Can it hold concrete together? This piece is actually like this big, but there's this tension of how quickly the concrete sets in and can it hold it. There's a couple little people there. There's really not that many humans in my pieces, but there's a couple there. This is a shot at the Badlands. Can it hold up a steel pipe? Can a steel pipe, can it hold up two very large steel pipes? This is a show in Paris at Christophe Gaillard. Then I started working concrete around 2009 or 10. I just thought it was interesting, like, could concrete be feminine? Could it be organic? You know, I was just curious. So I just bought it and started playing with it. So some of the first pieces there, I kind of poured them into molds. And then I started pouring them into frames with the photograph directly on it. The glass broke. And I was really surprised with how well these materials cohabitated. The plastic of the sea print was kind of providing a resist to the concrete. This piece of concrete fell off and the emulsion transferred onto the cement. So I ran with that. So this is pure concrete. The sea print's folded up, poured concrete on the face, and then pulled the sea print off. This one I just, sometimes the form, there's only one image that really works with it. So, and then I started, using steel as the frames for the concrete, bringing the steel, having it patina, having it start being an element. So there's the photograph inside, and then another one that has been transferred through some sort of chemical process that I don't really understand onto the face of it. So, these are heavy pieces. So it's also like, how heavy can a photograph be? How cumbersome can it be, right? I was able to go back to Hawaii. I got a travel grant in 2014, which was so amazing. So I got to spend a week on 4 different islands taking photographs. So that was incredible. I use those images a lot. And now, so I UV printed on this. So there's a C print in there, concrete, and now I'm actually UV printing on top of the whole thing, including the frame. And these are the largest wall hanging pieces. This was at the second show I did at Higher Pictures. So yeah, so interestingly, okay, so like Kate and I meet. So there's this moment where the photo world like finds my work through literally like Tumblr. And I was on a blog post on I Heart Photograph, which is how Kim found my work. But it was this moment where suddenly like, they're like, oh, photo can be this. And I think it was exciting, but I never really hung out with the photo. I had to go to the darkroom and I was afraid they were going to kick me out. Like I was like not doing the right. I didn't care about dust and scratches. I didn't even really have to be in focus. Color, like it's the landscape. It could be a little blur green. So like, I'm just like printing. So I never really felt like a photographer at all.
But you're the only one.
But I actually am.
That prints.
I know, but it's just funny.
Yeah.
But like so many of these pieces, it's all analog. There's no computer involved at all. It's going out and shooting digital in a camera with film in the dark room and working in the dark room and pouring concrete in a box. So I couldn't see it till it was done. These are kind of photogram elements. Those are rocks and sticks I use in the dark room. So scale, getting big. This is the largest. I poured this piece in Art in General. I had no idea it was going to weigh like 600 pounds. I really didn't do the math on that. But it is very heavy. So 6.5 feet tall. Okay, so I didn't show you a lot of other things, but this piece I have to keep in here. When I was at Skowhegan, I did my first version of this. So like building walls is something I did quite a bit. And I had this idea for building a wall in a tree. And then I was invited to be in the show. So this was at an arboretum outside of Chicago. And I built this tree in early May, and it was up through the fall. And it's a blue ash tree, so the tree kind of covers. There's not a single screw into this tree. It is safe. It is protected. And as the summer changes, the tree grows around it, and it really just reflects the tree and the back. So then the back looks like this. So I made this piece was what, 2013, 2012, and then this piece came right after. So in my mind, they're very linked. This was the first like large scale architectural photograph I did. This is at the Bemis Center for Contemporary Arts, where I just done a residency. So this is a column in the gallery that is wood. The piece is called Ghost of a Tree. And the photo is really of just this ponderosa pine that I took. Actually at Devil's Tower, because it's very hard to take a photo of Devil's Tower. It's just like this big mountain, right? You're almost too close to it. So this is sort of a photo I took walking around it. But I love this idea of the architecture really being the sculptural push through the image. So then another version, floor to ceiling. This is called Moonwave. This was at the Art in General show. The back. And now, yes, so then this piece only exists in this image of it now, which is kind of interesting. So this piece I showed at CPW in Woodstock 9 years ago. Yeah. So again, going through the wall, this is double-sided, but the nice thing about this piece is anyone that lets me put a hole in their wall, this piece can go through there. So I think that unfortunately the CPW, you couldn't see the other side of it, but at this show at Higher Pictures, if you went into the office, you could see the nubbin come through. And actually I was really mad at Kim because there was a pipe there. She said, there's no pipes in this wall. And I started cutting it and I was like, I hit a pipe. So it could only go in this much. And scale, so this was like a public art piece I did, the first one I did at an elementary school in Brooklyn. So again, like large scale, this is permanent piece. This is UV print on dye bond. And I did three pieces on 3 different floors. And again, sort of that idea of like the whole and seeing the backside of the image. And finally, outdoor sculpture. So once I was invited to propose an outdoor sculpture at Cordova Sculpture Park. So I kind of went big with this idea of UV printing on Corten steel. So this piece was installed. It's actually at my house right now. So if you guys ever want to come over, it's definitely rusted out, but they're UV prints directly onto Corten steel. You can see, sorry, that's not a great image, but I love how it changes, how it continues to change, how the sun, the shadows, the Corten rusting, and the different angles. So I've done a few of these large scale pieces since then. This one actually I showed inside. This is at RIT in Rochester. And this is a brand new one that's permanent in San Diego. It's actually in Encinitas, but the ICA San Diego. And this was nice because I was able to work this concrete element back into the sculptures, which I can see start coming back in as really part of the work. Those are some close-ups. And then I'm just going to show a couple more recent ones. So one thing in COVID, like am I doing okay on time? Okay. So in COVID, my husband got a job in Hartford, Connecticut, and they have this amazing makerspace. So I took all these welding classes because I really do want to kind of do it myself, but when they're that large, I can't really, there's nowhere for me to do it. So I started welding and was able to make pieces like at a smaller scale. So like, I just love the idea of welding a photograph. And so those are all burnouts that happen in the process. And now I only included one, but I have a whole series of wall pieces. Those are all steel, so UV prints on steel. And there's sort of gaps to see the wall. But now I'm able to like make those frames and aside from the actual printing, do most of it myself. I had a show at Higher Pictures, I guess a year ago or so. It was kind of funny because my first show in New York was at Higher Pictures, which is like a photo gallery, but I was like, really? You want to? So I think it makes sense in this conversation. I imagine these pieces could all be either wall pieces or sculptures that they each piece had, dozens of ways they could be shown. So I created this hinge system that was very, very complicated. And they're printed directly onto copper, brass, and steel. And then they can all be sort of piled together in a singular, essentially like a book. I was actually thinking of them kind of like a book. So here's a few photos of those. And lastly, I do love any opportunity to do something on site and respond to a site and make something large. I was an artist in residence at SUNY Purchase, actually in their sculpture department, and had a show in their gallery at the end. So I basically cut this huge piece out of their wall, made another wall there. And I like that there's a window above there. So the sunlight comes through and creates this little sundial on the ground. Actually, one of the coolest parts of this project was I met a dancer who was a Fulbright scholar there, and he asked if he could do a work to respond to my piece. So he invited his class. And so because this piece would be destroyed at the end, if you go to my Instagram page, I have like a reel. They, as a class project, did a whole performance where they destroyed this wall. It was super cool. I was sort of in awe of that. And they were in bare feet and they were punching out the drywall. So that's my last image. Yeah. Thank you. So what do we do? Questions, or do you want to?
Yeah, I guess we'll do questions. And I'll stay over here.
Oh, wait, here, there's a mic.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Any questions? We'll answer anything.
I know that, well, thank you so much. I remember when And I was thinking that, I know from at different points you have, I don't know, kind of like, responded to each other's work either directly or indirectly. And I was wondering, what are the pieces of the other person's that like really stick in your mind as like kind of moments that pushed you?
Ooh.
Oh, I definitely
Excited
I
you
saw
or-
them in the
yeah.
slideshow for sure. I remember the first time I saw the extrusions and realizing that like she had brought this dimensionality to an image that there was never anything like that before. And then also the ones like kind of the quieter piece where you have the little cutouts coming through so you can see the back, and I was like, at the same time. Yeah, that was like a major. It's a thanks. No, that was major for me to see those two pieces.
I was just remembering that we were in a show together, the first show we were in together at BAM.
Yeah.
And I had made these concrete pieces and
Yeah.
you had these, it was like sand and red. And it was
Yeah,
just something
yeah.
where I was like, we're both painters, man.
Yeah.
Like, it was just
Wait a
color. It was
second.
like color, like her
Yeah.
color, like her sense of arranging these things. Like I so respond like formally to your
Yeah.
decisions. And it's like, and then the humor, like
Yeah.
there's a humor there
Yeah.
that is like, cracks me up even looking at your thing where you're like, these are cutouts of a lady thing, or like you'll just like stick a doorknob on it or something. And it's just this, I love that.
Yeah.
Like, and again, like having things on wheels or hanging from the ceiling
Yeah.
and using like, and also decisions I would never do, like a Home Depot carabiner, right?
Yeah,
Like that's
yeah.
not in my language, but I love that it's yours and I can kind of totally respond to that. So.
Yeah, definitely. I'll respond sort of like in my own way, or you'll make a cut and I'll be like, well, why don't I
Right.
this?
Yeah.
Dude, Letha came to my studio recently and was like, if you don't put a hinge on that, I will. I was like,
Start threatening her. Forced collaboration.
yeah, forced collaboration.
Any other questions?
Yeah.
Hey, I'm curious about your process of making images and selecting images. I think that you talked about your process of going into the landscape. I guess also like your process of selecting which images and your process of picking images.
It's like a
Or sourcing
hoarding.
them.
Yeah,
Hoarding.
it's a hoarding, and I have no qualms about anything. Like some of them are licensed stock photographs, some of them are stolen from other people's Facebook profiles, some of them are. I purposely joined Facebook groups that are like cool shadows and like and Facebook Marketplace.
Watch out, she might lurk you.
Yeah, no, I'm waiting for the time
Waiting
when
for the
someone's
lawsuit?
like, I'm pretty sure that's like my grandmother's kitchen. My cell phone images, other people's cell phone, like a lot of times people will text and I'll be like, oh my God, I'm going to use that in a piece, like send some picture of something. So it's really across the board. I just have this huge file of all of them. Yeah.
That's cool.
So when the piece is in person, you do see like big discrepancies in resolution and quality, which is actually something that's really interesting to me when there's like you're like, well, wow, those are really not that's film and that's like a JPEG.
One interesting thing about that is I feel like when I considered using someone else's photographs, I was like, I can't do that to someone else's image. I felt like if I took it, I could ruin it, and I was okay with that.
Yeah.
So it's interesting that you're like, I don't care who took it. And this idea of ownership in the image. And
Yeah.
for me, they are, I think maybe it's not their personal or precious. It's like, I took it and I can ruin it.
Yeah.
It like relieves
Yeah,
the preciousness in some weird way.
And you also still engage with like a subject matter and an indexicality too. So it would feel different. Like I'm sort of like always looking for like a little sliver of where like the light goes weird or something, and it becomes much less of any kind of like reference point to reality. So that helps me. If I'm not like gonna steal like half of someone's grandma's face or something like that. That would be rough.
Letha, this I think is a good follow-up question for this one too. When talking about the image you made of the Grand Tetons, you said that being there and kind of the process of even going into the woods was like, it informs the piece. And I'm curious about that because I feel like knowing that you take your own images, for me as a viewer, it does shape my impression of them. I feel like there's a bit maybe more like aura, about the experience of knowing that you took that versus you know, the Tetons, obviously, there's so many images of that, and you could grab one very easily. And if it was a stock image, like there's a cliche about sort of every stock image, right? But on the other hand, I am still kind of as an audience, like wrestling, like how does it inform the work? Could you say more about that?
I mean, I think there's a few ways. I think one is like my body, like all of it's filtered through my body. I go to these places, I'm there, I come back. I don't know what photos are going to turn out. I just sort of trust or like enjoy or pay attention. So it adds this element of like time to it all. So I might have that idea and then go there and then a year or two later and then finally look at the images and then maybe not even use it till years later. So there's something of that time added into it that I like in the process. And in a way, like being there and photographing is so different than seeing the images. Like the image I thought might look great turns out bad or vice versa. So there is something of that like just not knowing. But then when I think about it, I mean, lately I've been going back to places that I've made works about, and that has been weird because suddenly like the memory is of the work. And then lately I've been thinking about photographs I don't take. If that is because I know it won't turn out or it won't look good or whatever. So sort of like the layers of like experience. And you know, the other thing when I'm out there is like noticing the horizon line so flat, you know, then that, and you know, you use a level to hang your artwork on the wall. So these relationships between the material on the wall and shadow and all of these things like that you see out there. Or also just the sheer amazing, like, I don't understand about the world out there that I think and the awe and the respect that like comes back into the work, if that makes sense.
I noticed that a lot of your cement works, they come out very like photograph-like, which, like, is that like on purpose or is it all spontaneous?
What do you mean by photograph? You mean like?
It's very shapely.
Ah.
It has like a lot of very like stark imagery and they almost look like it could be an object.
They are objects. What do you mean?
There are photogram elements.
Oh, yeah. You mean photograms in the photographs that are in the concrete or them being
Like,
actual?
the concrete itself acts like a photogram.
Oh. Well, also the texture, because I make them with a plywood box. So the texture of the plywood is like an imprint on the concrete, which is a real texture of it. But all the like curves and everything, someone's like, wow, you really like, you know, perfectly carved that edge out. I'm like, that was just gravity. It was just settling, like it was just water. And then I opened it up, so I don't even see them till they're done. Like it's a whole blind process. I pour the photograph and it's upside down, and I fill it with concrete, and I let it cure for like a week, and then open it up. So I really don't even know.
They do create a shadow even when you view them too.
Yes.
Like there's a shadow.
I wanted to have that dimension where it's like pushing back, and it is kind of, you know, thick,
Yeah.
and there is like little spaces in there for spiders to live. Yeah. And they do. You had a question?
I guess it's a question for both of you. Can you talk a little bit about your choice of not putting figures in your work? Both of you are kind of doing
I have been trying to work more bodily. As there's secret bodies in there. I mean, Ann always says that there's a lot of butts in my work. You know, there's something about like the body takes us so quickly into like a one-to-one or like a recognition that it pulls a little too hard away from the abstraction that is just like something that I'm going for with, and the recontextualization. Once there's a human element in photography, I feel like it's so quickly that our brain goes like photograph human, you know what I mean? Human me, that you don't get that like where, like for me, one of the qualities of a piece that I make that I find successful is this like push and pull where I'm like, am I looking at, oh wait, that's like a spoon. Oh no, it's not. You know, there's not an easy settling into any kind of recognition of anything. So I think that that's just a practical concern, but I am trying to work more human bodies back. And I used to have more like flesh or like close-ups of bodies, but I let Rachel have that
Rachel.
territory.
I think in even like undergrad, there is this thing of like once you are representing a body, it's like you're identified. You can identify it as, is it what gender is it, what race is it, and it's sort of like automatically like pigeonholes this form into something that people have relationships to. So I kind of purposely didn't want to have that conversation of representing a body. And also I felt like in the work, the viewer is the body and that they enter the landscape. I like the idea that the landscape has different relationships to different people's body. Like one of my favorite stories was that outdoor sculpture de Cordova, when I went to visit it, and someone said, oh yeah, someone, like the titles often are the locations, and someone had read the title, it said Joshua Tree, and they're like, oh, it smells so good in Joshua Tree. Like I love they automatically went to their memory of that place. And I love that even just the name or the image can like trigger that with a person. So. Helen.
Can you think about how being rated by Geminis drives and love your doors, how that informs your practice?
Oh man. Because we want it all. We want to be on the left and the right side. We want to be photographers and sculptors and painters. No.
Yeah, I think there's the multitude, the multitude present, I think there's definitely like I don't know how serious I want to get about astrology, but
you're more, you know more about the astrology.
I do. But yeah, I mean, I think that we both approach the curiosity. Geminis are very curious and experimental.
I also feel like it's like city and mountains.
Yeah,
Let's have it all. Like Colorado, New York.
Yeah.
Like could places be more different? And I kind of want both of those worlds. Like someone else was saying, like the construction, the materials. It's not even if it's a balance, it's not human bad, nature good. It's like these are together and it's complicated.
Yeah.
So I kind of like to like mesh that up, but I feel like I want both that construction world and the completely barren landscape, and I want to be able to like have both of those
I think
in this world somehow.
That's true. That's like I think it plays more of a role than I've thought. But and also that was how we connected. We were like, oh, you're a Gemini, I'm a Gemini. Like, woo. Back in the day.
And the dogs.
We're like 6 days apart, and the dogs and the Subarus.
I have a question from someone at home, from Seth David Rubin. This question is about artistic identity. You both speak about artistic process and material. Do you both think about yourselves as formal artists? I feel we are in very heavily content-oriented time. What do you think of that?
Formal artist.
Well,
artists dealing in formality.
No, I think maybe it has to do with there is not the representation of humans isn't in there or something. I mean, I think there can be a lot of content you can take out of the information, or what I'm thinking about. That's kind of a tough one.
Yeah, I'm not.
What do you think?
Could you read it again?
Yes, we are artists.
Oh, yeah.
I will declare
It took
it.
me a long time. I mean, I think it was like up and like very recent.
We're almost 50. We can own it.
50.
I think I understand I think I understand what they're saying. It's almost like maybe because our work has some formal qualities.
Yeah, that's what I'm wondering. Is it a question about form like dealing with like formality as
an aesthetic? But I don't know. I would hope there's more to it than that.
Yeah. I mean, I engage, like, I think I engage mostly in terms of formal qualities of the images I'm working with. I'm going for like color and shapes and to evoke a certain like emotional space. So yeah, I would say that if that's the question, yeah.
I mean, I think a lot about like what are assumptions people make about how something should behave. And then when it doesn't do that, to me, that's a little backdoor. That's a way of like pivoting that I would invite the audience. It doesn't mean I have to tell them that, but I would hope they might see something a little differently through the work.
I tell them that really early on, that if your your list of notes, you're like, with just at the top, that quote where you're like, how can I say it?
secretly adore it, but want to hate it.
Photography, but not be limited by.
Right. Be wanting to, it's like you want to grab it and make it do something, like that kind of frustration. But it also is like, for me, it's also like bound up in the landscape and this place and this like material. And I wanted to live in a world. It's like when I started going to the darkroom, I felt like a fish going like backwards, like a trout going upstream, because everyone's going digital, digital, digital. And I'll go buy paper and they're like, what are you doing? No one's printing anymore.
It was so astounding to find out that we had no digital, like there was no, the extrusions weren't some sort of CNC thing that,
Yeah.
like all of that was by hand. It really changed the way I viewed your work.
Do you think by finding an artist to sort of like a
Yin yang.
Like, you talk about that. Can you speak a little bit about like how you would feel as an artist, like if you didn't kind of have this ongoing conversation with another, maybe they don't have to be so aligned, like, but just how.
Jen Kelly. Wait, I was going to say Jen Kelly, because my first group of artists, my friend Jen is here. It was the ladies artist group, something like that. To have that community of like, let's get together and have studio visits once a month and meet and see work. And I remember Jen telling me, you got to make some bad work, Letha. And it really stuck with me because I was like fixed in this way. And I think Kate and I and Anne, like, we zoomed every single week for a year in COVID. We had our own studio group, but that's super important.
Yeah, I mean, I honestly don't think I'd be making without a couple of key people that I've bounced off of for like, and I feel like it's lucky that we've formed friendships like you and I and Rachel and I, but, and that's like an added bonus, but even just conceptually too, like it would be so much less fun to make work and not like have it bounce off of something that Letha's doing or Rachel's doing or someone else in the space is doing, just conceptually. And then it's like, oh, wow, we actually have more in common than just the work. And there's so many people in this room that I wouldn't be able to make work with without them being around. Like it just wouldn't be worth it.
Sweet. Maybe that's a good way to end it.
Yeah.
Thank you.